Good evening, everyone. My name is John Hughes, and I'm the music director of the Chicago Master Singers. Welcome to another session of CMS University. I'm glad you're here. And whether you are a member of CMS or are tuning in from afar, you are part of our community, and our community is growing every week, and it's really exciting. One of the ways that you can become even more involved is to participate in our chat function, which you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. So first, just make sure you're logged into YouTube. Then you can enter a comment or a question. You could give me a thumbs up. I saw one just come in. That's great. And then you can engage in a conversation during the session. You can even ask me a question. I just ask that you start something that's intended for me with 3 or 4 question marks in a row. And then from time to time, I'll glance over at the chat window, put any questions up on the screen, and try my best to answer them. All right, that's the rules of the road. Let's get into our topic for tonight, which is little known accompanied gems. Now, if you watched last week, you'll know that I talked about little known unaccompanied gems, pieces without accompaniment. And if you missed that or any other previous CMSU sessions, I invite you to just look at our YouTube channel, which has all of them recorded. So if you've missed anything, you can go back and watch that. Now, tonight's session is all about accompanied music, 3 pieces that I think deserve better notoriety or have some kind of interesting kind of secret that I want to share with you. And so whether you know these pieces or not, I hope that you can take something away from this evening's discussion. So the 3 pieces that I'm going to be talking about tonight are Requiem for Mignon by Robert Schumann, Geistliches Lied by Johannes Brahms, and The Ballad of the Brown King by Margaret Bonds. So let's get into it. Our first piece, Requiem for Mignon. Now, Robert Schumann lived a fairly short life, 1810 to 1856. But during this time, he was very close personal friends with Johannes Brahms, and they shared some similarities that we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, today, Robert Schumann is mostly known or thought of for his chamber music, his song cycles, some symphonic works, chamber works, especially his piano music. But he wrote a ton of different types of music. In fact, what he would do is kind of devote himself to one genre for a period of time and only write that type of music. So he talked about the year of the song, where all he wrote were art songs for voice and piano. Similarly, he had a year of the oratorio, where he only wrote oratorios and kind of devoted himself to that, didn't write much else. And so during his lifetime, he was known for a lot of different types of music. And, the way that we remember composers isn't actually always the way that they lived during their time. Now, Robert Schumann, you might not know this, but was very well known in his life for his oratorios. In fact, that is what made him kind of internationally known as a composer. He said that the highest expression possible in music comes from the combination of chorus and orchestra. And those of us in CMS know how powerful that combination can be, not only just physically and acoustically, but emotionally, right? There's just so many colors and layers to doing big choral orchestral works. And I hope we can resume that one day soon. Now, some attributes of Robert Schumann's style that are important to know. First, he often chose very expressive and literary text. So kind of moving away from the tradition of using sacred Latin text or biblical passages, he was choosing literary figures. And in the case of Requiem for Mignon, he chose Goethe. This is maybe a parallel to his friend Johannes Brahms, who, while he did set sacred scriptural texts occasionally, also set very secular texts, as we see in Schicksal's Lied or Nenia. Going back to Schumann, his literary texts seem to often revolve around these themes of reconciliation, transformation, transfiguration, kind of this character development. And we'll see that in this piece. We also see in Schumann kind of a reimagining of form. So he's, in particular in Requiem for Mignon, he's moving away from very sectionalized pieces where it's a clear end of a movement and is experimenting with how to get rid of that formalized structure in order to push forward the dramatic narrative. Now, this kind of concept of prioritizing the text and the form as expressive devices is very emblematic of the Romantic period, right? Where we're eschewing the classical forms and trying to better express emotion. We also see in Schumann a larger, more prominent role for the orchestra. And since he wrote all these oratorios at about the same time, all of his oratorios use basically the same size forces. So that's kind of an interesting thing to note. Again, like any Romantic era composer, very expressive harmonies, but also very fluid melodies, which I think makes his music so captivating. So a few other things just to be aware of. Schumann's most famous oratorio today is kind of an unusual piece called Das Paradies und die Peri. So this is kind of a mythological secular oratorio about fairies and kind of elfin-like creatures. And it's his best-known oratorio today, but it not only is known today, but it really established him as a prominent composer during his lifetime. Now, Requiem for Mignon is a separate piece from the Schumann Requiem, which some of you might be familiar with. This is a shorter piece, and I think it's not very well known because of its size. It's only about 12 minutes long, but it calls for a very large orchestra. So just from a conductor's programmatic point, it can be hard to find a place on a program for such a piece. To have such a big orchestra for a small piece can be tricky from a real pragmatic standpoint. But again, I think there is a parallel to this with like the Brahms Schicksalslied Lied or Nenia, that they are kind of these smaller scale pieces, but have a lot of really wonderful music in them. And so I'm excited to share this piece with you tonight. Now, this piece was premiered almost exactly 170 years ago, November 21st, 1850, in Dusseldorf. And it's based, as I mentioned, on a Goethe novel, his second novel from 1795. Now, Schumann was inspired to write this piece in 1849, when everyone was celebrating the centenary anniversary of Goethe's birth. He was born in 1749. Schumann was then inspired by all these celebrations of his birth in 1849 to use his text as a source for an oratorio, and that's where this comes from. So this is a programmatic work, meaning that it's telling a story. And in the novel, this young girl, Mignon, becomes obsessed with the main character, Wilhelm Meister, who had saved her life. And throughout the course of the novel, Mignon eventually dies at the end, and a requiem is sung at her funeral. So that's kind of what this is imagining happening, right? Now, again, we'll see here that Schumann is kind of idolizing this idea of youth and innocence, but also transfiguration and transformation as she matures and eventually dies. The structure of this piece is very interesting. First of all, Schumann uses 4 soloists, 2 sopranos and 2 altos, and they, in this recording, are actually sung by boys. Choir boys. And this then really kind of depicts these 4 soloists as pallbearers at Mignon's funeral. And then the chorus, the SATB chorus, is then kind of emblematic of the spirits of the departed. So again, we're kind of seeing this mythological conversation happening, metaphysical, between the actual world and the spiritual world. The work is divided into 6 sections, which move very quickly from one to another. The movement that we're going to listen to only lasts about a minute. There's no pause taken, and it just goes right into the next movement. This is in kind of sharp contrast to something like Messiah, where we have these scenes, right? We have recitative, aria, chorus, recitative, aria, chorus. It's very sectionalized. There's a pause at the end of each movement. Rather, here, Schumann is pushing that away and trying to figure out, how do I move this narrative forward by eliminating that very kind of predictive structure. So the movement that we're going to listen to is a soprano-alto duet, and we'll go into the next movement a little bit just because there's no pause here. But it's for two boys singing here, and you hear the sobbing violins, very dramatic here, and march rhythms that, again, are really trying to be programmatic, right? Tell the story of imagining this young girl's funeral and what a requiem at that funeral would be. So let's take a listen to a little bit of Robert Schumann's Requiem for Mignon, and then I'll take a look at the chat and answer any questions you have. All right, enjoy this piece. So there you get a real sense of how quickly it moves from one thing to another thing when the tenors and basses kind of come crashing in. But I think it's a really evocative moment and so emotional, right? And again, that's what we associate with the Romantic period. Okay, I didn't see any questions in the chat, so we'll come back to them. So put them in along the way, and I'll be sure to check when we're listening to the recording. All right, the next piece I want to talk about tonight, I know some of you know, which is the Geistliches Lied by Johannes Brahms. This is a beautiful piece, and even though CMS performed this, I believe, in 1998, I hope to kind of share some things with those of you who might not be familiar with the piece, and just remind you, those of you who do know it, why it's such a beautiful piece. So a little bit about Brahms. Again, I chose this younger picture of him. We kind of typically, especially myself, associate Brahms by having this big white beard and smoking a cigar. But here he is as a younger man, and that's more of what he would have looked like when he wrote this piece. He was only 23 years old when he composed Geistliches Lied, which I think is just astonishing, especially when you understand the craft that went into it. So born in Hamburg, again, the way we think of composers is not necessarily the way that they actually lived. So we tend to think of Brahms as a symphonist, right? Beautiful piano works, in addition to the pieces like his Requiem, which are beloved and for good reason. But it's important to remember that Brahms spent most of his career conducting choirs. So we see him conducting the Hamburg Frauenchoir, so the Frauenchor, the women's choir of Hamburg, and the Vienna Singakademie. So that's how he made his living. And again, we can see his compositional brain being informed by his conductor brain often in his music. Now, Geistliches Lied, like I mentioned, Brahms wrote as a very young man, 23 years old, and so it was written in 1856, but not published until 1864, shortly after the death of Brahms' mother. Now, this was part of a compositional exchange that Brahms shared with his friend Joseph Joachim, a very famous violinist, composer, conductor, kind of a jack of all musical traits. And these two young men were exchanging compositions not only to get feedback, but they were trying out different ways of composing, in particular counterpoint. And so we see this not only as a beautiful piece of music, but actually kind of as a compositional etude that turned out really, really well. So it's kind of an interesting insight into this piece. Now, this structure and the kind of the thematic material of the piece actually is very predictive or foreshadows Brahms' Requiem from 1868. So it would come out many years after Brahms originally wrote it. Now, in the piece, and I'll show you a score here, we see some of Brahms' love of early Lutheran music. First of all, the text by Paul Fleming, a very famous Lutheran chorale writer from the early 17th century. So he picks that as the basis of the piece. And we see that the melody here is very similar to the chorales that Bach would have been familiar with. Now, Brahms was an ardent lover of early Lutheran music. We know that he was particularly fond of the music of Heinrich Schütz, as well as Johann Sebastian Bach. And so we see kind of the melodic structure of his lines, and even the text sources are drawn from that period of time. Now, what makes this really amazing is that it's a strict double canon. So that there are two canons going on at the same time, and they are set a ninth apart, which is a dissonant interval. So again, Brahms is writing this to practice his compositional or contrapuntal technique, and so there's this very strict framework underneath, and that's what makes it all the more amazing of how beautiful it sounds. It doesn't sound like anything other than he just thought of the most beautiful notes that he could and wrote them down, but they're undergirded by this very technical structure. And so I think that, again, going back to the presentation when I talked about the Thompson and Frostiana, this is an art that hides art, right? It's very complicated. I'll show you it in a minute, how it works. It's very complicated, but it sounds effortless and completely organic. So what does a double canon look like? Well, if you look at the soprano part here, right? 4 beats later, the tenors come in and do the same music, but a ninth lower. So together, I'll play the soprano and tenor. Right? So that works. Then we have the same thing happening with the alto and bass. So the altos sing this. And then 4 beats later and a ninth lower, the altos sing this. I'm sorry, the basses sing this. So there's one canon going on here, there's another canon going on here, and to make it even more complex, there's also canonic writing going on in the organ part. So this piece, I think, just shows the brilliance of Brahms, right? It's not just a beautiful melody or a lush, beautiful chord here and there. It's really undergirded by this very strict counterpoint, which to me shows his brilliance as a craftsman. So I hope you enjoy this. Please listen for the end. I think this is one of the most beautiful amens in all of choral music here at the end of this short motet. And we'll listen to the whole thing. So enjoy Geistliches Lied by Johannes Brahms. Isn't it just, it's glorious music. And when you take the time to understand how it's constructed, when a really fine composer like Brahms writes, it's just unbelievable. So I hope you enjoyed that piece. Okay, on to our final piece for tonight, which is a piece that deserves a lot more attention than I think it has right now. And that is the Ballad of the Brown King by Margaret Bonds. Now, a little bit about Margaret Bonds. She's a Chicago native. She was born in 1913, died in 1972. She was born in Chicago and trained at Northwestern, where she earned both a bachelor's and master's degree. She had additional compositional studies with two great luminaries, Florence Price and William Dawson, who was known for his arrangements of spirituals. She also studied at the Juilliard School after her master's, where she studied the piano even more. Now, she's significant not only as a composer, but also as a piano soloist. In 1933, she was the very first black piano soloist to appear with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. So, a major groundbreaking moment. Now, let's talk a little bit about her life. Her father was a physician in Chicago and was active in the civil rights movement. And so was his daughter, Margaret Bonds, who eventually became really at the center of kind of the cultural renaissance that was happening in Chicago and Harlem in the mid-20th centuries. She was a close friend and collaborator with Langston Hughes, who actually wrote the text for this piece, The Ballad of the Brown King. Now, unfortunately, Margaret Bonds experienced discrimination because of her race, not only during her life, but even today to some extent. I read that when she was a student at Northwestern University, she wasn't allowed to live in the dorms, so she lived at home. And today, a lot of her music is out of print or it's hard to come by, although there's a big push in musical scholarship right now to make these editions available because her music really is very fine. So I'm looking forward to sharing it with you tonight and maybe one day even being able to perform it. So the Ballad of the Brown King, like I mentioned, is the text is by Langston Hughes. It's dedicated to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was premiered in 1954, and then it was brought onto a national televised program on CBS called Christmas USA in December of 1960. And this was performed by the Westminster Choir College, which their top choir, the Westminster Choir, which at the time was really the premier choir in the country. So this was a major accomplishment to have this not only performed by them, but then nationally broadcast. Now, this is a Christmas cantata, 9 movements long for choir and STB soloists and orchestra. And this tells the story of the three magi with special focus on Balthazar, who is kind of in historical tradition, is a wise man of African descent. And so it kind of tells the story from his perspective. Now, Bonds does a great job because this is a classical piece of music, but she draws from all these inspirations, including jazz, blues, calypso, and even some spirituals. And even we see this in the structure of the work, in that there's kind of this call and response between soloist and chorus, which kind of mirrors a call and response in a black congregation. Obviously, this is intended to be an allegory for the civil rights movement, to draw greater attention to black voices. So I think it's just a really fun piece and really creative, outside the box thinking here. Now we're going to listen to the final 2 movements of this. That Was a Christmas Long Ago and Alleluia. These are both, I think Bonds does a good job of kind of playing dichotomies here. So they're both, it's at the same time lyrical and rhythmic. It's at the same time repetitive but developmental. And so I think it's one of the reasons that it's so infectious. She also uses some creative instrumentation. In particular, she uses a harp and the organ in addition to an orchestra. And I think that it really kind of sets the scene of these magi. Now, before I play it, I just want to answer one quick question from Don here. I've only found one commercial recording of the Bonds by the Dessau choirs of New York. That's the one I'm going to be playing. I believe that's the only one of this piece that I could find. And I know that even getting a score to this piece is difficult, but like I said, I know there are scholars working on this. And you do see, in particular, this piece by Margaret Bonds starting to get performed more frequently. So we're hopeful that new, clean, modern edition of the piece is made available soon. Okay, let's get into it. The last two movements of the Ballad of the Brown King. I love that ending. You can totally hear the calypso ending on that little tag. So I hope you enjoyed these three pieces. And if you have any last minute questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll check that after we do some housekeeping, but before our moment of Zen. I did put together a little reading list that I thought, if you're interested in learning any more about these composers, here's some sources that you might like to check out. And I kind of broke them down by composer, because obviously there's a lot written about all these people. Starting with Robert Schumann, I would recommend checking out the entire September 2010 issue of the Choral Journal, which was devoted to Robert Schumann. So you can check that out. There's even an article specifically about Requiem for Mignon in there. So check that out. All of these are good. Obviously, I chose these sources out of many, so I highly recommend all of these. But if I had to choose one other thing to recommend, it would be the final book here, Rethinking Schumann. This is a fairly recent book. I think it came out in 2008. And this is kind of where I would go. It's the most current research. Going on to Johannes Brahms, obviously there's a million books and articles written about him and his choral music. In particular, I would recommend this Virginia Hancock book, the Brahms Choral Compositions and His Library of Early Music. So if you're interested in exploring that side of Brahms, his love of Schütz and early Lutheran composers, I'd point you to that one. And then Michael Musgrave, I believe this book is kind of the definitive book on Brahms in my mind. So I would encourage you to look at that. Finally, Margaret Bonds. The second source here is a review of this piece that appeared in the Choral Scholar in spring 2018. That is an open source journal, so you can find that by Googling it. I would recommend that. And then these other two books by Green and Walker Hill really lift up a very marginalized group in classical music, which are Black female composers. So here are two resources devoted to lifting up those composers, helping us learn more about them. So I would encourage you to check those out. Okay, I'll take a minute and look at the chat, and then we'll do our housekeeping. I'm glad you all liked the Margaret Bonds. That's great to see. Eileen, how can we gain access to the Choral Journal? Unfortunately, you have to pay or be a member of ACDA, although if I am. So if any of you do want a specific article or something, please let me know, and I'd be happy to send it to you. Linda said, John, I heard classical black music. I heard classic black music in her composition, but I heard other types, as you said, in calypso as well. Yes, certainly. And like that rhythmic drive of the Alleluia, we see that very frequently in a lot of spirituals too. So she really was pulling from a lot of things, as well as classical music, right? She was a trained classical composer. So it was a melting pot of styles and genres. And I think it produces this really exciting piece that I think really deserves to be performed more and to have greater notoriety. Okay, a couple housekeeping things. First of all, thanks for joining me tonight. I always have fun on Monday nights sharing music with you. I hope you enjoy it too. Please join me next week when we're going to be talking with composer Philip Stopford, who will be my guest here. I have a little interview planned with him, and then we'll open it up to questions from you all. So make sure, if you aren't already, to register using the Eventbrite link in the video description below. I'm also pleased to announce that we will be continuing CMS University in the spring. Obviously, we would love to be able to do a concert in April or May, but just doesn't look like it's going to be safe to do so at the time. So we're going to continue this, and we've got a full semester planned. It will begin same time, same place on Monday, January 11th, and continue through April. It's going to be a wonderful thing. We're building out the registration and all that right now. So I'll give you the full course schedule next week, tell you how to register. But for now, I just want to let you know that we will be continuing this. I think it's very exciting. And I will tease a few of the topics that we're going to talk about. One, we're going to do a series throughout the semester called Inside the Score, where we're going to examine one piece in great depth. So we're going to be talking about 4 pieces: the Mozart Solemn Vespers, Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms, Fauré's Requiem, and then we're going to end with Handel's Messiah. So we're going to have some very literature-focused sessions. We're also going to have things like that are more practically focused. So one about using the International Phonetic Alphabet as a singer. Another one on how we use our voices throughout our lifetime, from going through a voice change to singing well into our later years. So please join me for those topics and more. And again, we'll be announcing how to register and how to the full course schedule next Monday night. So another reason to tune in. Now, if you haven't yet, please like this video. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Then you always will get a notification of when a new video has been posted. And you can always go back in our channel and watch previous sessions that you might have missed. If you know someone who isn't watching CMS University who might be interested, please send it their way. Invite them to join us for second semester. It's really fun to see people who aren't necessarily affiliated with CMS in any other way, really part of our community, and I'm really glad for that. If you are able to make a year-end gift, I hope that you are considering Chicago Master Singers. Here are 3 ways you can donate. All the full links are in the video description below. We understand it's tough times, so please don't feel pressured. But if you are able to donate, we would be very appreciative. So thank you in advance for your generosity. Finally, our moment of Zen for tonight, which I can't believe I've taken this long to get to it, is the beautiful Abendlied by Josef Reinberger. This is just one of the most, there's a reason it's one of the most favorite choral pieces in all of music. And the text comes from the Gospel of Luke. I know it as "Stay with us, for the evening shadows are falling." I hope you enjoy this little moment of Zen, musical nightcap, if you will. Abendlied. Thanks again for joining me this evening. 2020 has been a year that we won't ever forget. But one thing has not changed for me, and that is that I'm really, really grateful for the gift of music. And not only the gift of music, but the community that music builds around itself. And even though it's different, we are a community, not only in CMS, but in CMS University. And I am grateful for that. I hope you and yours have a wonderful, happy, safe Thanksgiving. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week for my interview with Philip Stopford. Until then, have a good night and take care. Bye.